There's a world you're living in. No one else has your part. All God's children in the wind, take it in and blow hard. Neil Young's song, There's a World, is a key inspiration for our ongoing series of heartfelt conversations with folks from all walks of life. We're diving in and exploring their practice, their process, and how they express their unique genius to help create a more compassionate, wise, and present world. This is your part. Welcome back to Language of the Soul, Conversations on Healing and Growth. I'm Ben Umstead.
And I'm Martin Perkins.
And our guest today is Virginia Newcomb. Polymath of the stage and screen, Virginia won acclaim from audiences and critics alike for her turn as Lydia in A24's The Death of Dick Long, and produced Lynn Shelton's Sword of Trust. Her screenplay Stolen Daffodils won a Film Impact Georgia Grant, and most recently she co-starred in the Fountain Theater's production of the play Alabaster. Welcome to the podcast, Virginia.
Hi, thank you for having me. I always love to hear other people talk about me, but it's specifically endearing to hear a friend that I've known for a long time speak of me in that way. So yeah, thanks for the intro, Ben.
You're welcome.
Every time he speaks in that way, I'm just like, you know?
Yeah, it's a great shot of confidence, and you make it sound so grand. So thank you.
Yeah. So I wanted to jump into the conversation around your role as June in Alabaster and its connection to your own personal life and how the role in your life kind of juxtaposed in such extraordinary ways.
Well, I'll start with a brief trajectory of my timeline, and that, I grew up in Alabaster, Alabama. You'll already know that that's the name of the play you just mentioned, so we get back there. So I left when I was about 20 on a scholarship to the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute in LA. Knew I wanted to act, knew I wanted to express myself through performance. And that opportunity arose, and I did not at the time expect to go so far from home, but it equally exhilarating and terrifying, and maybe a feeling that I would use as a marker for choices for the rest of my life, of that intersection of intensity. So I was in LA for about 12 years, which is where I also met Ben. And there was a moment where the sites started expanding beyond LA. This was personally and professionally. And I ended up in New York for, a couple months on a show. I ended up coming back to Alabama for a few different movies. I started finding myself in more leadership roles as a producer. So my world started scattering between the Southeast and the West Coast and these other markets more rapidly. And I think that is when, in this similar trajectory of my own awareness of it, where I started to question the idea of home and how that would intersect so frequently with my creativity and with my trajectory as an artist. And I am as steeped in that in this moment in my life as I ever have been. I ended up meeting and falling in love with a cinematographer who is now my husband. And, my trajectory expanded internationally. And so this is something that I am now back in Atlanta exploring as much as I ever have. And I feel it similarly as unrooted as I ever have, while also the most expansive in my own creative potential as I ever have. So this kind of discombobulation is also what is fueling a lot of my creative energy right now. I was back home at my father's house in Alabaster, and I learned about this play by Audrey Cephaly. She is an Alabama playwright. She's written many plays based in the South. And I saw someone share a post I think she made on Facebook or something. And I saw the title of the play. and kismetly just felt like I had to read it. I had to learn more about it, and I did. And after reading it, said, I have to do this play. And it was exactly 2 years later that the Fountain reached out to me. So this, was last fall now, and asked if I'd be interested to come back to LA. And I've worked for this theater a couple times now and do this show. And what had transpired in that 2 years of my own personal grief and loss, and how that paralleled June's loss in the show, also just made it feel like one of those things you have to do. And it wasn't an easy decision. I mean, doing 99-seat theater in LA is not a practically easy thing. It's not a lot of money. It's not, I don't have a home there, so all these questions were coming up again about how would I do this, but I had to do this. So I'll speak more to the role in the context of the play, but just as far as how the trajectory continued. So my husband and I had just moved out of our home in Atlanta because of mold. So I had been displaced, had been put back in that question again of where do I want to be? Where do I need to be? Where is home for me when this opportunity came up? So we decided to be still in that question a little bit longer, and I'm going to go do this play. I get to LA, I get this surge of energy of the aspect of LA that I really respond to and am attracted to. And the next day was the fires. So I was immediately thrown into another kind of existential question of, should I be doing this play? Why do I keep being pressed with this question of home, of security, of stability? And there were multiple times in those first couple of weeks where I wasn't sure if I would stay. In that time, I was displaced 3 times into different homes. And when I finally found a secure place to be that I knew I could be for the run of the show, I said, okay, let's settle in now to this space and come back to the initial reason why I came to do this, and let my body catch up a little bit and put all of this into the work. And it's a constant exercise for me of being with where I'm at and allowing that to interpret the work that I do. And sometimes it's incredibly uncomfortable. And this was one of those times that I had to say yes in a moment where I was terribly unsure, but there was, getting in touch with that deeper intrinsic part of myself that knows sometimes more than I know of why I'm doing something. But to be honest, I'm just on the heels of that, and I haven't fully defined or processed that experience. June is a tornado survivor. She lost all of her family in a tornado. So the disaster parallels became loud also. But June has also, struggled with being seen. She's an outsider artist. She's a folk artist. She wouldn't even call herself artist until someone comes into her space and tells her she's an artist. So this photographer from New York comes and does a piece on her, and they have a very deep and important connection for each other about, and the play is about women and processing grief, and how we really only are able to do that in community and in connection with others. So it was an opportunity for me to explore that in a story, while I was also deeply trying to understand that in myself.
As you were speaking, I'm keenly aware that in the aftermath of all those events, through the run of the play and the fires and such, that in many ways your time now must be sort of centered around marshaling your resources, finding a restful space and maybe home in a different kind of way. And there's something else that feels for me very connected to that. You said, and I think it's very interesting because it leaves me curious, because I think of grief as a very solitary process, an inner process, and you describe it as a communal process through the lens of the play. And I think my sense is it can be both, and it can be either, right, for depending upon the individual. But I wanted to sort of hear your speaking around it.
I think it is both. I think it speaks to my process as a human and as an artist. I believe I oscillate between these places of really intense solitude and intense need for company. And I would say I grew up very shy as an introvert. Although I was in a supportive, stable home, there was still chaos. And, that I think for a highly sensitive person, that creates a certain mechanism within the body to take care of yourself. I've learned that, as I've gotten older, what I did for myself in that time. Shyness, I think, is a beautiful quality, actually. But as I got older and as I chose to make these bold decisions to, escape to Los Angeles, I created this other mechanism of fierce protector and rebel and assertive, I'm going to own my agency over anything else. And this is also an incredibly important part of my strength and process as an artist. But these two parts of myself are constantly in conversation. And I think I've developed this other part of myself, sure, that's able to kind of tend to them both as innocent parts of myself. But I also think it's valuable for me to hold all of those parts in a compassionate way, because they're also the parts of me that I think I really strive to hold on to as an actor. The wounded parts of myself, the fighting, the fierce part of myself. And as I navigate grief and loss. I lost my mother in September of 2023, and then I lost my sweet dog last summer. It was pretty much my child. And these concepts of mothering and caring for as part of what I'm experiencing with grief, then those other parts of myself really come to the forefront, and I'm learning how to let them help me, how to, as often as I need to, oscillate between a private internal practice and an outward visceral connection with other humans. And I realize it's a cycle that I've always gone through, and I just have a heightened awareness around it now in a way that I feel like I'm able to choose it more and know more intimately which I need at any given point. Because sometimes stillness isn't what is being called for in me. And this is, what I attended to myself when I first left home. There's a part of myself that calls to me to be loud, to release, to connect with a deeper expression in myself that I think that I can only do on stage, or I can only do with others. And so I guess it's both. I mean, it is absolutely both for me. Sometimes I know what I need or which one I need, and sometimes I don't, and it's intuitive, and I find it as I go.
As you're speaking, I experience such joy around the unique nature of each individual person's experience around the notion of grief or letting go into oneself in the varying ways that we can do it, and how that letting go into self then finds expression in the world, right? And as someone who works with folks both clinically but also in growth classes, what you're sharing is so resonant because of the why we've even titled this part of the podcast Your Part, because we really want folks to recognize that, yes, we're bringing Virginia here because she has a unique pathway, and that each person's unique pathway informs all of us about the possibilities of what it means to heal and grow in this life. So I love hearing your expression of, for me, it needs to be both in these ways because it's who I am. And you're learning along the way about what that means. And I'm of the opinion that the moment that I've got it all figured out, it's probably time for me to check out.
I accept that more. I think that was a hard edge for me for a long time. I'm supposed to figure this out. I'm supposed to figure something out. And then the more I sat with that, what I'm figuring out became more and more unclear, and just accepting to enter into this, invitation of life and not know, I think is such a powerful perspective. I think it's a very difficult one with the human construct. Not knowing is very hard for us. We fail at it constantly, but just knowing that not knowing is a powerful place to be really helps me through all of the uncertainty of the world right now, the uncertainty of home life, the uncertainty of my industry. It allows me to decide where I want to be in it, regardless of what I know. And where I want to be is creating from these places, creating from these places of the gray, doubtful places. I think there's something very rich. And I guess if we're talking about my part, and as I've written more and as I've narrowed in on what kinds of stories I want to tell from my heart and my experience, a lot of these have juxtaposing qualities. There's a lot of paradox in the way that I think and that I write. And I believe that's something I have to offer. this in between, this liminal that we're constantly experiencing is actually magical if we can shape it in a certain way and not be so scared of it, or be scared of it and that be okay, be scared of it and realize that that is part of the human experience, that yes, our finality is terrifying, but that being here with it is how we live our fullest. And when I am in that in performance, or when I am in that in writing, that is the essence of myself that I recognize as potent, and that I am continually trying to touch right now to access more of.
The spaciousness of not knowing in the way that you spoke of it just now, I totally tuned into, like, at the same time that it's the spaciousness can be just open to possibility, it can also be entirely overwhelming, right? I love that, that, as you put it, that juxtaposition, and the need to be willing to be right there and take it where it might be, and recognize that in many ways what's coming toward us, coming, that's in our field, right? It's the welcoming of that is in many ways, that's the discernment I make between ambition and calling. That when we allow what's in our field to be kind of like, our plaything, our what we can like dance with, rather than when ambition is like, I gotta go grab it, I've got to make it happen. And it's, the experiences are so radically different within us and in the world itself. I'm just really touched by this way in which, a woman from Alabaster, Alabama is playing a role in Alabaster. It's just so, it couldn't be more perfect, right?
Yeah, I mean, and things have come to me that way. The professional opportunities I've had, the ones that have been mentioned at the top, a lot of them have been very cyclical. It was within the year that I decided to come back southeast that I discovered that Dan Scheinert was making a movie with A24, who was also from Alabama. And in that year, I had had enough time to, make a little bit of a reputation and remind people who I was. And I had some short films and so, my path was easily crossed with his. And when things happen like that in this work, it feels so written. It feels so obvious. But when you're living it, and when you're searching for it, or when you're striving for it, it always feels like you have to manufacture it so much. But when I look back on how much home and where I'm from, regardless of where I am, impacts my opportunities, and I think really the art I am supposed to be making, it really allows me to, oh, I felt myself get emotional then for a second. It really allows me to let it happen. There's an allowance that can be so difficult in this work, because it is these microcosms of what you're saying, what our culture is. Film can be fast and hard and very ambitious and very intense and athletic, and warlike. And sometimes you can kind of get into the primal aspect of that, and that's exciting, and that's fueling. But I have long craved and try to implement in my work as I will say it, a feminine, a receptive, a patient, a time honoring practice of filmmaking. And verdict's still out. I don't know if I can achieve that, but I'm trying to make new spaces and build off the relationships that I know that value those same things and create in new ways in this industry. I was part of an incubator that was used design thinking to reimagine independent production. And a lot of ideas come out, but we are all constantly up against the structure that is so built into the way movies are made. And you do need a lot of money if you want to pay people properly. And and we've all experimented with moving all those pieces around so much to see what's going to be the most conducive for this era of indie cinema. And we get like pieces of it right. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that is growth, right? It's getting pieces of it right. And then by the time you look back, you've created this new model. But we're certainly in the era where it's incredibly confronting, incredibly challenging, and confronting in is this the medium I still want to work in? Or is this the medium that I want to work in right now? Because I'm having such a hard time finding the supportive quality of it.
Hmm. It's such a dance between the notion of a kind of DIY approach to life, regardless of whether one is in film or, in my own life. I can really relate to the manner in which, because that's, in many ways, I've chosen that DIY approach, and it's because it's resonant and true to me, right? And I hear you speaking to that, like, the heartfelt quality that indie film brings into the world in ways that the adrenaline filled warrior larger film projects don't necessarily bring, right? So, and how, where does that meet, and what's my role? And I think there's just such a universality to what you're sharing.
Hi, everyone. If you've been enjoying our podcast, please consider visiting martinperkins.com for more healing and growth resources.
In Language of the Soul, a year-long course I offer to my community, I focus a great deal around helping human beings find their unique expression of self-knowledge. In each of us, there's a unique genius that's ours and ours only. My calling, my expression as a teacher is about helping my students find that unique genius within themselves. There's several ways of taking the course, and I encourage you to explore it if you're a human being seeking to know themselves more deeply.
The course is available both online and in person. Option 1 to taking Language of the Soul is a shared learning format where you and a group of your peers meet online or in person. Option 2 is a one-to-one format of mentee and mentor with acupuncture sessions included, while option 3 is just the one-to-one mentor-mentee. The new 3-part workshop, Building Resilience in a Changing World, is now available on Martin's YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/@Language of the Soul. That is an @ Language of the Soul. As burgeoning podcasters, the greatest gift you can offer Martin and I is to share this podcast with just one person. Word of mouth remains the most genuine way to share the art and media that you love and care about. So in advance, we thank you. And now, back to the conversation. So, Virginia, you've talked a lot about the nature of film production from a logistical standpoint, how there can be paradoxes, how all of these things inform each other. There's a sense that for me, and I know that you connect on this too, cinema especially is able to offer the magic of the liminal, right? The everyday magic, the magic of the mundane, of those still moments in a way that I don't think any other medium, art form can offer. And yet, the model that you've been talking about, the structure that you've been talking about of the industry, so often goes against it, as you've noted. And you talked about your work in the incubator and how there are all these different ideas. But I want to hone in and ask this question. When you talk about making a film production, what is your personal vision of how it would go, regardless of budget, regardless of time, regardless of establishing roles, even perhaps removing a sense of hierarchy and yet retaining a sense of leadership? What would that look like for you, your vision as a storyteller and filmmaker?
Thank you for posing it. I've experimented with some aspects of this. I've experimented with hiring an all-women crew. And not that that's the ideal in my mind, but again, just part of experimenting and stretching and bringing balance to what I think is out of balance. I've experienced with producing some short films where everyone, is favored nation. Everyone's working at parity. So everyone's getting paid the same across the board. The thing that I find the hardest to connect the dots with now are, I adore process. I adore development. And I'm noticing more and more that the projects that I respond most to, other films, other pieces of art, when I hear they're coming to stories, they're labored and they're long and they are, or they have roots in, time. And there's a speediness that I connect with anxiety in our work that I mean, you're one of those examples, Ben. I mean, you and I and Lana, a filmmaker friend of ours, have had a shared thread for years now, and we still feel very confidently that it is process. It is part of us moving towards a project that we are still discovering. That I think is the extreme version of what I'm saying, where we really are just letting it unfold. But I think in an organized fashion, that means more pre-production. That means more creatives and the actors being involved in these synergizing practices that make what is, I find, one of the difficult parts of the process to upend, which is just production. It allows that to have a kind of history and a kind of weight and depth that just kind of rushing into the process, for me, I have not been able to find. And I think that then that could be carried on into post-production as you allow what you discovered and allow those two stages to interpret something new in that latter phase. But for me, I think it has a lot to do with development. And to be fair, I think you can also overwork things. I think you can overthink things. But I don't think that I and my community run that risk at this point. I think the space to be together and in community to energetically feel what it's like to be in a space. We did that a little bit with Dick Long. Dan and his partner at the time created, we had dinners together. We had a party before production. We had these little spaces where we could come together and connect around the ideas of the story, but also start to feel what the synergy of these particular people is going to feel like, and start to integrate that into how you behave around each other, how you deal with each other, how you respect each other, how you create together. I think that's an incredibly, incredibly valuable process. And time always equals money in our work. And that's maybe something that I think could be reworked in terms of just budget lines, is how much we value that time over other things.
Yeah, truly. You speak of this sense of flow in filmmaking, right? And going, let's view it as being in flow rather than compartmentalization. Development, pre-production, production, post-production. Truly, they're all just flavors of storytelling. It's all the same process. It may have different qualities in terms of each step, because there are steps there. But what we're talking about with filmmaking and storytelling, well, for you and I, Virginia, it resonates so deeply and is the true basis of our friendship and the longevity of our friendship. But it goes beyond that artistic space, and it comes right back to our own practice with ourselves and how we are, that it's being in this flow rather than compartmentalizing with ambition, like you noted, Martin, compartmentalizing because of anxiety, like you noted, Virginia, and rather meeting the moment as it is, not knowing, like you so eloquently spoke about, and being okay with being uncomfortable. That's something that we've talked about on the podcast before, and it's so wonderful just to hear that organically come up from your experience, because in that regard, in that sense, it's how compassion is rooted. It's how presence grows no matter what we're doing, no matter our part. That's to me, the most human thing. And then how we express that, of course, you've talked about all of these wonderful senses of home and how they appear, whether that's how Alabama kind of always comes back to you, or you always go back there physically, or how you cultivate home in other ways. I wanted to get a sense of the nature of, in this moment of vulnerability, in this moment of community, of DIY, what does outsider and outlier mean to you? And are those powerful terms? Are those potent terms? Are those terms that you've left behind?
I do think that there's a trap that I think you're kind of alluding to, of putting yourself outside of something in order to identify or to find home, right? Find reason in your existence. And I think that as we see in other institutions, it can be detrimental, that divide, that stark contrast, because the truth, and I think in my essence, a truth seeker, is in the overlap. And I think that's why I've created this octopian career, right? I stretch between all of these places, but there is a center blob that I am looking to connect. I can get frustrated with this aspect of the industry, or I can take some time rebelling it. But the truth is that I am somewhere in between all of that, wanting to find continuity, wanting to find the truth in all of those contradicting elements. Even in the way that we tell stories, I'm so sensitive to how we portray discourse and how we portray conflict, and it's just the way we understand the world. But as storytellers, I think we're perpetuating that idea that we always need to be in discourse, that we always need to be in conflict with something. And I think in my writing, I'm searching for how we come together, how we integrate, even when there is conflict. What's the story that is breaking through the middle of that? And so I think that's reflective in my life and how I approach the art and the industry, is that I straddle the world. I straddle the Southeast and California. I straddle these places so that I can keep being influenced by them, and I can keep influencing them. Has that stretch been exhausting for me at times? Yes. I believe that grief is something that has allowed me to ground down and find a home, or not find my own stability within that stretch. And in my writing, I'm exploring this element. So I'm speaking of the integration of these worlds, but I'm also speaking of maybe the still and silent place within these worlds. And that's a dot dot dot. I leave that with a question. This is again, that's another thing that I am. You come to me at a time when I am asking big questions, and I I get right up to it. And then I almost, like, even in this moment, I choose to stop myself because I don't want to get caught in the trap of figuring it out. I want to spread it all out, maybe, is what I'm looking to do. I want to take a look at it all. There's something that I observe being a person from the South, and a person who has, I'll say, worldly aspirations and creative largeness. When I am a person of the South and I am anywhere but the South, there's a perception. When I am back in the South, I am perceived another way. And I realize that this is something that I have always built into the characters that I play. I like to break perception, or I'd like to not break, but I like to open up perception. And I don't think I've had the opportunity completely to do that in the work that I've been provided. So this is a big element that I'm putting into the work that I am creating. And it's a sensitivity that I have when I see it, when I observe it in others, and how we are treating each other in this time, that we see a certain kind of people, be them Southern or Republican or Belgian, and we have these preconceived notions, we have these biases. And what I love about what I do as an actor, as a storyteller, is to be able to observe that, to put that out and challenge our own biases, and to really practice empathy through art, the empathy of innate connection that we all have. We are everything and we are nothing, but we're all together in that. And that is the power. That's what I feel, that's where my passion lies in this work. And I am just kind of cracking my voice in that.
As you were speaking, I'm keenly aware that most of our audience aren't artists in any sense of the word in their minds. And that one of the wonderful challenges that I give all of my students is finding within themselves that connection to creative life force, that connection to learning how to tell their own version of the inner story, so that life can be, whether we're existing in the mundane or the liminal, we're existing in a possibility around who we can be. And I was wondering, like, what would be your offering, or what is your offering to the person who doesn't necessarily see themselves as an actor or a visual artist or a singer or whatever the mainstream notions of being creative might be, right?
I even sometimes play with the idea of I believe and I assert that I am an artist because I know all of the nuance of what that means to me. But I didn't know that when I was a child. And that's really the most potent place as an artist, is that innocent, playful, experimental. What I'm getting to is that regardless if I keep creating art, which I will, but if I weren't going to keep creating art, everything that I've learned of how to be a human, how to function in a very challenging world, as a sensitive person, and to stay sensitive and to stay open-hearted and to stay free in that space, I have learned through these tools I've gathered as an artist, as an actor. I'm able to accept all these parts of myself much more wholly because I learned how to play with them. I learned how to use them to paint with. I learned how to use them to express. It's a deeper, more intrinsic language for me than even the one I'm speaking right now. I can communicate more these parts of myself. So, gosh, I'm still discovering my journey as an artist and what that means in terms of the pieces I will create. But if this is all there is, if it's how it's constructed me as this human person trying to navigate this world, that is what I'm most proud of because I didn't have a lot of representations of that growing up. I think as I look back now, I can see where I did and just didn't have words for it, or how my family was creative in more earthen and organic ways. But that I found that on my own and that I had the bravery to like assert it and to take all these tools with me and share them with people that aren't artists, like that. I don't know if I've said it that way either. That is something that I'm most proud of, at least up to this point in my creative life. And I would share that if you can find art to help you play, if you can find pieces of art to help you just to express this world differently, express your experience, to communicate the things that you feel in here that the words don't do enough for, then it's a really beautiful tool and one that I would hope to be able to share with anyone, however they defined themselves in this world.
I think what's so extraordinary and so nourishing and inspiring to hear from you today is just everybody doesn't have to think of themselves, an emphasis on the word think, right? Think of themselves as artists. But what you are describing is so much deeper than this cognitive ego, ambition driven thing of definition. If anything, the definition comes from these depths that you've swam through today and shared with us and that we've been swimming in together. And that's just it. You speak of the moment as it is in this really transformative time, and yet at the same time, the irony of it always being transformative. And I think you've so potently, so poetically, so enthusiastically, with great curiosity, reminded us all about that. And that's what being an artist is. That's what being a human is. I don't think there's any difference. Martin, you talk about the creative life force. There's no difference there. We may put labels on it. We may say actor and we may say writer. We may say producer. And for me, as your friend of 12 years, I go, that's just Virginia. That's just Virginia. That's who Virginia Newcomb is and is becoming and has always been. And I just love kind of getting to dive into, your sense of play. So thank you.
Oh, this is very special. I've done my share of interviews, but that's not what this is. And I appreciate it. I appreciate a space to not be worried about time, to not have to reduce any aspect of myself into the digestible, quotable thing. It encourages me to keep being and doing that, because that is the era that I am in, and that is the person that I am, and what I want to continue bringing to spaces, even if those spaces don't feel conducive. I know how to be myself in difficult spaces, and that's something I want to keep bringing to my work, to the structures that I speak of. I think that's very powerful, and I'm not the only one. There are many of us wanting change, wanting to do things differently, and it really does start with doing it, being that in the spaces that maybe don't feel perfect yet, because it's really about us more than it is the spaces, right? We are the space. So this has been a good reminder for how to enter into spaces of discomfort with others and be who I am. So thank you.
Virginia, where can folks find you if they'd like to connect, interact?
Well, given the trajectory I spoke of, I very well just may be in your hometown. So keep an eye out. I could be near physically. But as the internet goes, I am alive and well on Instagram. I am not very active, but you can find me there, and you can find most of my projects and films and links to where to watch them. I recently got onto Letterboxd, which I know has been around for a minute, and as an indie filmmaker, it's a sin for me to have not been on there yet. But I am finally on Letterboxd and starting to talk about films that I love, and many of my films, well, half of them at the very least, are there and can direct you to where to watch them. And then watch out for more of my writing. You might find some of my weird perspectives in my posts on Instagram. You can get a taste of my writing there.
Language of the Soul, Conversations on Healing and Growth is produced by Ben Umstead and Martin Perkins, with editing and music by Ben Umstead.